Hi, my name is Max. Today we will talk about how to navigate new taxes and minimize issues with New Zealand business compliance. Our guest is Kirk Hope from Business New Zealand.
Welcome to the show for business owners, proudly brought to you by easyfreight.co.nz.
Kirk Hope is the Chief Executive of Business New Zealand, the largest business advocacy body. He's heading a team of 30 economists and policy specialists. Kirk's experience and profile earned through 2 decades in government-facing roles has given him privileged access to New Zealand ministers and government officials to ensure that business interests are represented throughout the policy-making process. If you want to learn more about other business tips, then subscribe to this channel. You can ask any questions in the comments below. Kirk, would you like to add anything about yourself or the organization?
No, you've said more than enough. Look, I mean, I would just say about the organisation, we're one of New Zealand's oldest advocacy organisations. We've been around in one shape or form or another for about 100 years, and we engage with around 80,000 New Zealand businesses on issues which are important to them.
Kirk, it's been a busy start of the year. There will be a lot of changes that are yet to be confirmed, and there were a lot of new legislation and regulations that have been set in stone. What do you think are the most important things that will affect New Zealand businesses this year?
Probably 3 things. Certainly, businesses' ability to access skills. So whether that's either through the education system or through the immigration system, both of those systems are going through substantial change. So from an immigration perspective, businesses need to be, there are some advantages coming for businesses who are well organised and understand what they will need and how they might be able to tap into the immigration system. And of course, Business New Zealand and the organisations which form part of Business New Zealand can assist businesses with that. The other area that is undergoing some big changes is the education sector. So there's a vocational education review underway, and we're obviously working with the government to represent business and employers on that. So those are big things for businesses, because one of the things that we're seeing is still quite strong demand for New Zealand goods and services, and we've got low unemployment and high participation rates in the workforce. What that means is, of course, that there are very few people available, and so we have been relying a bit on the immigration system, and we need to continue to rely on that until the education system can change the way that it delivers some skills. That won't be a short-term fix. So businesses really will need to engage in a very cohesive way with the immigration system. So that's one area which always comes back to us about as being important. A couple of other areas, of course, one that'll be really big for businesses is the prospect of, and where the government get to on a capital gains tax for New Zealand. We don't have a comprehensive capital gains tax. And of course, the government are considering what we do there after the recommendations of the tax working group. So I was a member of the tax working group, and happy to take any questions in relation to that. The other area, which is a bit more obscure but really important for business, the Reserve Bank are changing their capital adequacy rules for banks. So they're effectively doubling the requirements. That'll increase the costs of capital and funding for businesses if those changes are made. So those are 3 really big areas and sets of issues for New Zealand business at the moment.
Talking about skill shortage, why do you think we still have a skill shortage? If I'm not mistaken, we've been talking about it for many years, and we've been talking about it, I think, with the previous government as well. What do you think has to be changed to minimize this problem?
Look, I mean, I think we have to not get too carried away. I mean, the reality is all developed economies are probably facing the same challenges, right? As you've got an aging demographic, as the baby boomers age and move out of the workforce, we don't have a natural population base to replace that. So of course we're having to rely on migration for skills, and our education system actually is also because of the demographics of Western democracies. You're not getting enough students to fill lots of those jobs, people coming out of the schooling system. So those are really the 2 areas, and we've had a very, very poorly connected set of mechanisms for engaging business and the education sector. So we've got a big skills mismatch. The OECD says that New Zealand has one of the biggest skills mismatches in the OECD. That is, what's coming out of the education system isn't meeting the demand of employers and businesses. So we have to go to to the immigration system to try and access those skills. Now, these things aren't easy to fix, and of course, the sad reality is that you will often have politics around issues of immigration. We've seen that play out across the world.
Obviously, one of the important changes that will be affecting New Zealand businesses next month is the rise of the minimum wage, which is going up by nearly 10%, 10%. And what do you think about the minimum wage rise? Is it the right thing to do for New Zealand?
Well, look, I mean, there's lots and lots of arguments about the benefits of the minimum wage. More dollars in people's pockets to spend in the economy, and people being able to live a better and more fulfilling life. I mean, I think our view about it is if you get an increase in wages without commensurate productivity, you're really just adding cost. And people always argue, people who are arguing in favour of the minimum wage always argue, oh, well, you just want to pay less. But actually they fail to understand that even an increase in minimum wage goes right through businesses, because if someone has more skills than their colleague who has come in on the minimum wage, their pay goes up by, as you say, max 10%. And they're going to say, well, hang on, I'm more skilled. Am I less valuable now because my pay hasn't gone up 10%? And you get a lot of pressure through the wage system, not just at the minimum level. So this has a real impact on businesses' costs and their ability to pass those costs on, so if they have lots of products and services that they can pass those costs on through, they might be okay. If they don't, they have to wear it. They need more capital to be able to do it, or they go out of business. So that's the sad reality.
Okay, that's a good point. That as soon as the minimum wage goes up, it will most likely trickle down to other stuff and
trickle up.
Yeah, trickle up, exactly. So most people heard that Vodafone is looking into outsourcing some of their services. Do you think, or do you actually see that New Zealand businesses are telling you, hey, we're going to outsource it? So it's actually going to be negative in the big scheme of things for New Zealand businesses.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of balancing issues there. What Vodafone's choices in relation to outsourcing are, demonstrate how much these costs are starting to impact businesses. And because they don't have the ability to pass some of those costs on to consumers, they have to make different choices. And certainly outsourcing could be one of those choices. I wouldn't say that's a really good thing for New Zealand, to be honest. I mean, what we should be doing is we should be making sure that our businesses are high value adding businesses that pay well as a bottom line. That doesn't mean we're not going to have low-skilled workers and opportunities for low-skilled workers, but we should be really focusing on mid-skill and high-skill occupations and sectors and industries. I mean, a good example of that for New Zealand is the very rapid growth that we've had in the ICT space, in the ICT sector. We've got about 30% growth in that year on year in that sector, and that's a high-paying sector. There aren't enough people in New Zealand currently that have the qualifications that are needed to fill the demand in that sector. So I think it's not either one or the other. Businesses will have to make some pretty hard decisions as they face higher costs for lower skilled workers. But that some of those decisions will be strategic decisions that they'll have to make as well.
Obviously, one of other important issues that people were talking about is the 90-day trial period. What has already been confirmed and how it will affect New Zealand businesses?
Okay, so the government, Labour Party, initially said that they would get rid of the 90-day trial. In fact, through the political process, it was retained for businesses with 20 or less employees. It's just to give people a sense, I think there was a lot of misinformation about the so-called overuse of the 90-day trial. I mean, our argument was that 20 employees or less is too few. We needed to just retain it in its entirety. And just to give you an idea of how little it was actually being used, there's 2.9 million people employed in New Zealand. There were 80,000 people who've undergone a 90-day trial. 20,000 of those weren't picked up. So a very, very low percentage of the overall working population were no longer had a job as a consequence of the 90-day trial. Then you say, well, probably the 90-day trial is working. 20,000 people out of 2.9 million employed people is a very, very low proportion. So, we're really disappointed that sort of politics has played a role in this, because the 90-day trial was really effective. When we've got high participation rates, low unemployment rates, and as I said, we've got constant skill shortages, we really need there are very few people in the pool of labour for businesses to tap into now. So they need to be able to have the opportunity to ensure that the people that they do bring into their workplace fit within the workplace.
So it's still going to be available, right, for small businesses?
Yeah, it's still available for small business, but we think it should be available for all business.
True. And if you have just joined us, I'm talking to Kirk Hope, the Chief Executive of Business New Zealand, and you can ask any questions in the comments below. Kirk, what do you think is the current business confidence? Is it getting better or is it getting worse?
Look, I mean, it has started to improve, but I think it'll be really interesting to see what sort of GDP growth figures we saw in the last quarter of last year, because that'll tell you actually businesses have a reason not to be confident. One of the interesting statistics one of the interesting observations that I make about business confidence, it was at a generally low level, and we saw it bounce back. But interestingly, businesses' own view about their future was a lot brighter than their general business outlook. Now, there were a lot of things that were playing on businesses' mind. You've already covered a couple. The end of the 90-day trial for businesses with more than 20 employees. Increase in the minimum wage, which go right through their employee and right through their business. The prospect of a capital gains tax, general policy uncertainty. So there was a range of things that were really, really impacting on business confidence and their appetite for investment. It did rebound at the end of last year, but it'll be interesting to see where it is for this quarter.
You mentioned something about the taxes, new taxes. Let's talk about them. Environmental taxes. What has been already confirmed and how it will affect New Zealand businesses?
So there's been a lot of misinformation actually about environmental taxes. So as I said, I was a member of the tax working group. What the tax working group agreed was a general framework for the use of environmental taxes. So you wouldn't always use tax as a policy tool, right? Because say, for example, the tax working group said, corrective taxes or behavioural taxes don't tend to work. You need to tax at a really, really high rate to get any kind of impact at a behavioural level. So clearly you don't want to tax necessarily people who are operating in particular types of environments in that way. So tax won't always be the best mechanism. There are other policy tools. Straight out regulation might be better. It might create behavioural change in different ways. You might have market-based mechanisms, for example, like the emissions trading scheme, which is currently being discussed and debated in terms of pricing. So, I think what we did is we just said, here's a framework for thinking about it. Tax won't always be the right answer, and the farming community are a big part of the productive community in New Zealand. So we have to ensure that they are helped through any process where environmental taxes or other policy that impact the environment also impact farmers. So it's really important. So those changes will any change that comes about as a result of that still have to go through a big policy process. The government will still have to make some decisions around that. So there's nothing that's going to happen quickly on some of those things.
And do you think it will touch small business owners? Like, say, I've got a retail shop, I've got 5 staff, I've got a couple of vehicles, maybe a truck. Or is it just for big farmers and corporates that has big factories? Who should be interested in these taxes?
Right, because one of the things that could occur is that costs increase, particular types of things, carbon intensive activities. So, for example, if you're running a diesel or a petrol vehicle, prices might go up. There might be differential pricing. You might get benefits for using electrical types of vehicles. If a particular type of farming practice incurs additional costs, then that'll go right through the supply chain. So I think small businesses, in particular that are suppliers to the farming industry or to the agricultural industry, or they are recipients of product. They just have to keep their eye on what's going on in some of the developments there. I think it would be really critical for them to watch any price movements in particular.
Okay. What else should small businesses pay attention to in the next 3 to 6 months?
Well, one other thing that I mentioned is the Reserve Bank changes to double the amount of capital that banks are holding. That'll have a really significant impact on the cost of business borrowing, and some of that borrowing is also capital for business. So, look, I think businesses should really keep an eye on that. We're very engaged on behalf of our business community in the process of engaging with the Reserve Bank about making sure that those changes, they understand the impact of those changes for businesses. We don't want to see businesses paying more for their borrowing when that's not related to risk. It's simply as a result of a regulatory change that is might be arbitrary, for example.
Kirk, I want to respect your time. How people can find you if they have more questions about Business New Zealand or your organization?
Sure, they can just email me at khope@businessnz.org.nz, and I'm happy to take any of their questions or answer any of their queries. I've got, as you said at StartMax, I've got a team of 30 policy specialists here which cover a wide range of areas. If people are interested, they can get in touch with us. We also have a website, www.businessnewzealand.org.nz, and we cover a lot of territory on that site.
All right, thank you, Kirk.
Thanks, Max.
Thank you for watching. In the next episode, we talk to Richard Conway, the founder of Pure SEO. You will learn the latest tips on search engine optimization and how to avoid mistakes when hiring a marketing specialist. Click on this video to find it and make sure you subscribe because more good stuff coming soon.